John was a pastor who preached to thousands of listeners every week. He wrote a best-selling book, and his personal life was spotless. So from all outward appearances, it seemed like John had a really successful spiritual life. But what others didn't know is that John was plagued by thoughts urging him to deny Christ or to pray to Satan. And he would argue back intensely against these thoughts because he didn't want them. He would literally spend hours at a time beating his fists in the air and saying, "I will not, I will not." Eventually, John, who is a real person, he did find relief, but not through arguing. And in this video, we're going to take a look at when Christians get demonic thoughts or urges to, in various ways, engage with the devil. John, the preacher with these urges to blaspheme Christ and to pray to the devil, was actually none other than John Bunyan, the author of the famous Pilgrim's Progress, which is one of my favorite Christian books. Now, he had a lot of chronic doubts and intrusive thoughts, really bad religious thoughts. And he wrote about his experience in his autobiographical account, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. And then later, psychologists were able to read that account and diagnose him with scrupulosity. What we find about John Bunyan is that for somebody with obsessive-compulsive disorder, he's actually not that unusual. So a lot of people with scrupulosity get these unwanted and really horrible thoughts. And sometimes these thoughts will be about blaspheming God, sometimes it's about committing some form of sacrilege, but fairly often people with scrupulosity will get thoughts about the devil. Some people get these unwanted thoughts that they should pray to Satan or they should worship the devil, or maybe they get these urges to sell their soul to Satan. And it can be really difficult and confusing for people with scrupulosity because then you add to the mix this idea of false memories, and you can't quite remember if you did sell your soul to the devil. You don't actually know if you did have some kind of inappropriate encounter with Satan that you can't remember anymore. So you end up in this obsessive-compulsive cycle trying to understand these thoughts about Satan that just don't make sense. And then if you begin to recognize that these thoughts about Satan are not normal, then it can turn into an obsession about, am I somehow like demonically possessed? So I recently did a video about intrusive thoughts, and I just want to encourage you to check that out if you're not familiar with the term intrusive thoughts and how that works. But they are definitely, intrusive thoughts are a signal of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And in this video, I want to address specifically intrusive thoughts of a demonic nature. First, let me give you a crucial psychological insight. Every single thought that you have falls into one of two categories, okay? Either it's considered ego-syntonic, which means that it is consistent with your ego, consistent with your sense of true self, of who you really are, okay? Or it's considered ego-dystonic, which means that it's in dissonance or conflict or disagreement with your true sense of self. So the ego-syntonic thoughts are viewed as wanted, they're viewed as appropriate, and they're considered good, basically, okay? But the ego-dystonic thoughts have kind of this alien quality, as if it comes from outside of you, it's unwanted, you don't know really where it comes from. So this ego-syntonic is the good thoughts that align with your sense of self, and the ego-dystonic is very alien and foreign and unwanted. Let me give you an example. If you have somebody that has like a paranoia disorder, then she might go around locking all the doors. Maybe she even locks her refrigerator because she's afraid people will steal from her. They'll even steal her food out of the fridge. So she locks everything. And so maybe a psychologist looking in on that would say, oh, this is extreme behavior and it's inappropriate to lock your refrigerator from your family members, right? So that would be considered by a psychologist to be inappropriate behavior. But the woman with paranoia, in herself, she really has this belief that what she's doing is good, it's protective for her, it's keeping her safe, and for her, it makes sense to lock everything. So for her, this abnormal behavior is considered ego-syntonic in her mind. Another example would be somebody with an eating disorder, and maybe they have like a really dangerous BMI, they're skeletal, they're having problems with their organs functioning well, so they are very unhealthy, but they will get these feelings that they're not quite where they want to be yet as far as visual appearance, and so they might feel that it is completely appropriate for them to purge their latest meal despite all of these health problems that they're having. So their ideas about their body image would be like ego sin tonic because it's appropriate to their sense of self that they should be purging their meal. Now, when we come to obsessive-compulsive disorder, these are not ego syntonic thoughts that we're having. They do not agree with our sense of self, so they're considered ego dystonic, right? They're somehow alien and foreign to us, and it's not coinciding, it's not in harmony with who we really want to be and who we believe we are. So whenever you're having these intrusive thoughts about demonic themes, about worshiping Satan, about selling your soul to Satan, as long as you're having these thoughts and you feel that it is not in harmony with the real you, right? It's not what you want, you don't know where it came from, and you're really resisting and trying to get rid of it, that means that this thought is an ego dystonic thought. It is not in harmony with your ego, and it's not coming from your true sense of self. So if that's the case, our next question would be, if this thought is not from you, where is it from, right? So there's only two options. Number one, it's from the devil himself. Number two, it's from your OCD. Now, this is ironically really good news because if Satan is telling me to worship Satan, that's called a temptation. And the Bible tells us that we're going to have lots of tribulation, temptations, and trials in this life. Beloved, do not think it's strange concerning the fiery trial that is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. We know also from 1 Peter 5:8 that the devil walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, right? So none of us are immune to the temptations of Satan, and some people simply experience those temptations in different forms. And so if we think like, wow, it's Satan tempting me, well, that's really great. I can rejoice that I'm counted worthy to suffer like Christ. But there's another option to consider. Maybe it's not demonic harassment that you're experiencing. Maybe it's obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is a mental health condition that fairly frequently can hijack a person's faith experience. But really, either way, whether these demonic thoughts are coming to you because of Satan tempting you, or whether it's coming to you because of a mental health condition, either way, you're safe because these are not coming from you. So if you're somebody that experiences intrusive thoughts of a demonic nature, I really want you to just sit with that thought for a minute, breathe in that thought, and recognize you really are safe, okay? Because one of the biggest problems with obsessive-compulsive disorder is that constant feeling of insecurity that we have. We always feel like we're not quite safe, like there's always something wrong that's in the back of our mind bothering us, okay? But this is that faulty message that the OCD brain is constantly sending us. Something's wrong, you're not safe, you gotta fix whatever problem's going on, even though there's no real problem, okay? So just think on that for a second, that, these thoughts of a demonic nature, being ego dystonic, it means you do not have the responsibility over them. They are Satan's temptations, perhaps. They are the creation of your OCD brain, perhaps. But in either case, you're okay and you're safe. So just let that sink in, that you are okay, even though your brain is sending you these error messages. But I want to go a little further now and really dig to the bottom of these evil thoughts about Satan. What if it seems like those thoughts were actually ego syntonic rather than ego dystonic? What if it seems like you really did want to think that thought? Well, unfortunately, for people with scrupulosity, it can sometimes get to this point where you finally cave in to the pressure of that intrusive thought, and you do blaspheme Christ, or you do mentally agree to that evil thought, whatever it is, simply from the strain and pressure of having to resist that thought for so long. But this is a really interesting thing because unlike people who are making the decision to turn away from God and leave God behind, these people who have these cyclical thoughts will perhaps agree to those evil thoughts, but then in a few days they'll be right back sincerely asking God for forgiveness. So what's actually going on here? Here's how the cycle goes. Initially, you're just going along in your day when you experience this trigger, and you know exactly what the trigger is for you. In this video, we're talking about how demonic thoughts can be a trigger for us. And directly after you experience that trigger, you enter a stage of rumination, where you're just turning around and around and around in your mind, trying to figure out why you had that thought, where it came from, how you should respond to it. And rumination is in itself very stressful, and it's emotionally and mentally taxing. So we typically ruminate, and as we're ruminating, we also enter this stage of resistance, where we're back and forth just persuading ourselves not to respond, or not to agree to it, not to accept that in any way. Again, very mentally taxing, very exhausting. So at some point, we just keep going and going until we hit the point of exhaustion and we explode. And that explosion is basically our final point of can't do this anymore. We explode, and then we have a free fall drop after that point because our emotions and our mind is just completely taxed out. And it's in that drop that we experience mental silence. And that's when we know that we've had as much as we can take. And then we return at some point because we genuinely do love God and we want to be reconciled to Him. And that's when we come back and we ask for forgiveness and try to return to the state that we were in before that. So if you experience this cycle, it definitely is OCD, okay? Because a truly devil-worshipping person will not have this cycle. If you're truly worshiping the devil, it will go in one direction and it will not have this cycle back of coming to reconcile with God, ask forgiveness from God. It will be like one directional towards the devil. Okay, if you have this cycle, it is OCD. So if you're a Christian having these intrusive thoughts about the devil, what should you do? Actually, the answer is really counterintuitive and it's not what you would expect. The answer is simply to ignore the thoughts and do not engage with them. Okay, it's kind of like, imagine if you go to visit your aunt and she has 10 little yapping chihuahuas and they all come out at the same time and they're like yapping around your heels and they're really angry and you think they're gonna bite you. Okay, if there's 10 chihuahuas, do not start kicking. Okay, because if you kick one, the other one is gonna latch on and just bite you in the ankle. Your best bet is to just be very still and hope that your aunt comes and calls the chihuahuas, right? So we don't want to, it's also like bees. If you've ever been around bees, you do not hit at the bees. You just remain very still. Intrusive thoughts are very similar to yapping chihuahuas and bumblebees, right? If we try to hit at them, they're gonna attack and they're gonna get worse and they're gonna intensify. If we sit very still and we refuse to engage, if we just ignore them, eventually they will go away on their own. But once we enter this cycle of argumentation and resistance, that's when it can gain momentum and overcome us in the end. So because this response to intrusive thoughts can be so counterintuitive and feels very unnatural, that's why the best course of action is to get professional help if you have religious OCD or any kind of OCD, to be honest. And specifically with scrupulosity, it does respond very well if you get help from a traditional therapist and a spiritual coach that can help you resolve those spiritual doubts. So I would actually encourage you to look at one particular post on my website. I'll put a link in the description below that does give a few key tips on dealing with these kinds of intrusive thoughts. And there's also free worksheets that you can download that will help you in that process if you're not able to get into therapy right now. If you have awful, scary thoughts about the devil, you're actually in company with spiritual giants like John Bunyan. And you'll be happy to know that John Bunyan was eventually able to cure his scrupulosity and he went on to live a life of devoted service to Jesus. And I'm confident that you'll be able to do the same as well. Wherever you are in your journey with scrupulosity, whether you're just finding out about it, whether you are doing some internet searches now, whether you've been in therapy for some time, I just want to encourage you, take the next step. Whatever that next step is for you, take it. Because scrupulosity does get better, but not by accident. I do hope this video was helpful for you. Please go ahead and subscribe for more videos about identifying and overcoming scrupulosity, and I will see you next week.